Hi everybody, my name is Lauren and welcome to the Omnivorous Bookworm. So today is going to be my June mid-month sort of check-in so that my end-of-month wrap-up doesn't have to be super long. So this is what I've read or completed so far in the month of June at the halfway point. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go through the books and talk about the book briefly and the rating that I gave to it in the order that I have read the book. And then at the end of the month, I will have everything organized, where it should go and how many genres I read and all of that stuff. So to start off with, the first book I have that I finished was Amor Stories by Natalia Borges Polesso, and it was translated by Julia Sanches, and I gave that book 4 stars. So this book is a short story collection. They're literary short stories. Like the majority of the book are short stories, and then the end of the book we have a lot of poems as well. So there's altogether we have 33 short stories and poems. So the short stories themselves are very short, even. None of them are super long. And then at the end we have the poems. All of the stories and poems deal with women and lesbian relationships or some type of relationships with women romantically. So we get all different aspects of their relationships, like from first love, first kiss. We get like the sexual and romantic aspects, but we also get like the other aspects, like growing old together, um, even infidelity, and those types of things that are part of relationships, and also how those are happening specifically in lesbian relationships in Brazil, because this book is set in Brazil. It's translated from the Portuguese, which is really interesting. Um, I really enjoyed all the short stories. I'm not a huge like poetry person, so I probably am not the best person to say one way or the other. So if you are a poetry person, you might feel differently, and I think that's why I ended up giving it more 4 stars. Also, because most of the stories were pretty short, I liked it because we sort of got these like snapshots of people's lives, but you also don't really get into a lot of depth. But they are really interesting, like the way that she has everything portrayed. Like it's really interesting. I think one of my favorite ones is a little girl who's discovering that her grandma's friend is actually her lesbian partner, and the girl is also starting to discover that she is a lesbian too, and that makes her fearful to think that she's afraid of it in herself, and so then she's afraid of it in her grandmother. But for the most part, I would say the stories don't dwell a lot on, like, it people. Some of the stories do target like people struggling with their sexuality, but I would say for the most part, the majority of the stories are just people living their lives, and if they're struggling with something, it's not just their sexuality, or it's maybe they're married to a man and they're like, so it's more about the infidelity than the fact that they're struggling with their sexuality. Of course, that's an aspect of it, but I would say that there's one story that, and actually she did it a few times, that I really liked, where so she's looking at all these aspects of lesbian relationships or female romantic relationships, and there's also several of them that talk about the spiritual aspect of a relationship, and I just think that that was a really cool way, and the way that she did it, I don't want to ruin it, so I'm not gonna like give any spoilers, but she did it in a way that you don't expect, and it's not about like, oh, is this a sin, is it not a sin, like, ugh, everybody, whatever. So but it's more about like exploring that aspect, and like, okay, if you choose to be religious, that is, in some ways, it should have nothing to do with your sexuality, but it's also related. So how your relationship with this person is also, you know, a relationship with your spiritual side, however you believe that. So I really like that. I thought it was really unique how she did it. And it's also interesting, you know, it being set in Brazil. I think almost all the characters are like upper middle class people in Brazil. So it was, I liked it. It was really interesting. Okay, and then the next book I have is called In the Market for Murder. It's the number 2 in the Lady Hardcastle series by T.E. Kinsey. I also gave this one 4 stars. It's a historical cozy mystery. So we follow Lady Hardcastle, but the story is told, it's in first person from Flo, who is like her lady companion, kind of helper friend. And it takes place in like 1906, I think at this point, like early 1900s, England, in a small town. It really reminds me of like if Miss Marple were to meet I don't know if you know like Miss Fisher, like her what do they call it? Like the murder mysteries. I've only seen the TV show, but I think there were some books too, but I never read those. But like Miss Fisher's murder mysteries, where she's in Australia in the 1920s, like Lady Hardcastle reminds me of like that's the Miss Marple setting with like that character, but like in the early 1900s because it's not in the 1920s. But she's had this crazy life. She's a widow now, Lady Hardcastle. She's like in her 40s, and she's a widow, but she was like living in China and India with her friend or companion or lady's maid, whatever, Flo. And Flo is really interesting because she was raised in a circus. So they have all these really interesting things. Their banter is really interesting together. It's a whole series. I've only read the first 2. I enjoyed both of them. I will say that what the interesting thing with this book is I remember the first story. Like I remember the characters, I remember a lot of the things that happened, but I still cannot remember. Like I remember the second one, everything that happened because I just read it. But the first one, a lot of the how the plot gets resolved, I don't always remember. And the reason that ends up happening is because the actual mystery part of it is a little bit overly convoluted in my opinion. I can see that the author's like trying to make it very complex, but it just becomes a little bit confusing like afterwards. It's not confusing while you read it, but like afterwards I had impressions of the character, like the 2 main characters, but I couldn't remember a lot of the other things that happened. And then what also ends up happening, so you have these like really 2 like strong main 2 characters, but then the rest of the characters, apart from Flo and Lady Hardcastle, all the other characters are a little bit flat. It's a little bit more like cartoonish. They're still fun, and like I still enjoyed reading it, but yeah, that's definitely. I feel like a lot of the other characters might suffer because these 2 characters are really strong. But it's available on Kindle Unlimited as well as the audio, and the woman who does the audio, it does a really good job. So they're really fun to listen to. They're just nice, like, books to relax, and like if you want something to kind of turn your brain off for a while but still be interesting, I recommend it. Okay, the next one, number 3, I read Empire of Sand, which is books of Ambha. It's the number 1 by Tasha Suri. I gave this 5 stars, and it's adult fantasy. This one was really, 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 really good. It is set, she said, loosely based in the Mughal Indian Empire, which I'm not super familiar with, so it makes me want to like learn more about it. Our main character is Mare, and she's half Amrithi, which is like they're these people who are half like children of the gods, and they have this relationship, and they have these special powers, and they do these like special dances with the gods for sleeping. It's this very complex religious and magic system that I found super interesting. I really, really liked it. I also think she did a great job showing people like in realistic ways where they have to be in these confines of their culture. Obviously, it's the culture she's created, but that's always like one of my pet peeves in fantasies, where you'll have this like very like hierarchical culture, but then like this woman is just like, it's usually a woman, could be a man, but they're like speaking out really loudly. They're, you know, doing all these things that wouldn't be appropriate. You're like, how are they getting away with this? And I feel like in this book she does a good job of really, you feel the cultural constraints. You feel like, ew, they can't do it. Like, even if they want to, there's like there's no path. There's no way for them to go to do these things. And I really, really like that. I really appreciated it. She has a lot of interesting themes. Like we have the, there's one of the main themes that I think is really interesting is choice. And that no matter what happens, you always have a choice. Even if it's the smallest choice, you have that choice, and like own that choice, and you can like use that choice. I really, really like that. We also get like a theme of consent, with like, you know, how to controlling people, and like how people choose what they want to do, making vows, and like making promises, and things of that nature. And then another thing that we see repeated a lot is that we see characters that love someone a lot in different contexts, like a mother who loves her daughter, a father who loves his daughter, two people who are in love. And even though they love each other so, so much, and they love this person, and they want to help them, and they want to do everything for them, there's this ceiling, and there's this limit of how much they physically can do for this person, and they do everything they can, and sometimes that's not enough, and sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And I think she explored that and looked at that in really interesting ways that you don't always see. The other thing that she did a really great job on, is the romance. I mean, it's not like a romance fantasy, but the romance in the fantasy is really integral. Like, the romance and the fantasy is like, or the plot is connected. You can't just separate the romance and have its own, like the plot would, it's needed. And I think she did a really, really great job. Um, and it really is a romance. We don't have any like the bedroom door is closed. We don't have any of that. So if that's something you don't like, you don't have to worry about it. If it's something you like, sorry, it's not there. But I think if somebody thinks that they don't like romance or any type of romance subplot in fantasy, I would definitely advise you to check out this book. If you still think that, then yeah, you probably would never want romance in your fantasy. But if you think that it, like, she does a great job. I've never seen it done so well before, personally. I also like that they have the heroine Mare. She's really strong, but in not a traditional way. She's strong in the sense that all these bad things keep happening to her, and she keeps going forward. And I think it's a great show that, you know, we think of strength as the person who, you know, does all these things, but sometimes being strong is just surviving. Like, all these things keep happening, and you keep trying, and you keep going, and that oftentimes takes more strength, than what we think of as being strong. And I think she does a really, really great job with that as well. I will say the only the only criticism I have, and this is really small, and most people would not care about this, but I am like a language nerd. So we have all these distinct groups within the Empire, to the point where she can look at somebody and be like, oh, they're part of this group because they look like this. And yet there's no mention that they're speaking different languages, or that people would have different accents when they're speaking those languages, which I just find is not believable. Because if we are so separated that we look different because we're like with these different groups, and we're an empire which has these like different like countries, or what used to be different like regions, at the most we would have different accents. So even if we're speaking the same language, you would be able to tell somebody, like, more often you can tell where somebody is from by their accent rather than how they look. Like, if you look at me, you don't know where I'm from, but if you hear me speaking, you think, oh, she's probably from the US. So that was like a small thing. But it was like one of those things. It's like, oh, I don't like that. But yeah, obviously I still gave it 5 stars, so it didn't manage that. The ending was very well done. I really liked it. And I would say there are a lot of intense themes in this book. Like, there are some trigger warnings. We do have some enslavement. We have like some blood. We have death scenes. We have like a cult like thing happening and like spiritual abuse. So those are some things that you might not always be on board with, or it might be difficult for some people to read. Okay, so the next book I have is The Crooked House by Agatha Christie. I gave this book 6 stars, which for me is like one of my favorites for the year or all time. So I gave it 6 stars because it's my favorite Agatha Christie that I have read to date. I really, 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 really loved it. So in this book we follow, it was published in 1949. It's a mystery classic, and we follow Charles, who is, he's come back from, he was serving in the war in Egypt, where he met Sophia Leonides, and they sort of reunite when he's come back to England. And quickly we discover that her grandfather, who was in his 80s, what was his name? Aristide, I think? What's his name? Let me look it up here. Yeah, Aristide Leonides, he's murdered. And his whole family is living in this house that they call the Crooked House, which is based on the, children's rhyme of the Crooked House. And all of them have like the opportunity to do it. So she's hopeful, Sophia's hopeful that it was his much younger, I think she was like 30 or, yeah, like maybe about 30 at the time of the book, his wife Brenda. And so he was in his 80s, so she's kind of hoping, like, she's like, I hope the right person did it, because I hope it was her, because she doesn't want anybody in her family to have done it. And it's interesting because they all had opportunity, but nobody really had a motive, because he was super generous and just like the strong person in the family. So we have Brenda, who's living in the house. We also have Sophia and her parents, her dad, Philip, who is a history professor, and her mom, who is like a very dramatic kind of B-level actress, super dramatic. And then also Sophia has 2 siblings, Eustace, who has some issues with walking. It's like, I think they called it, he had some paralysis of some kind. And then her sister Josephine, and then they have their tutor that lives there, Lawrence. Then there's another couple, like her uncle, who lives there with his wife, Clemency, and she's a scientist, and Roger is the other uncle, so like the 2 brothers, Philip and Roger. And Roger's business wasn't doing well. So, and then we also have Aristides, his first wife's sister is living there as well. So we have all these people. Any of them could have done it. And so Charles is trying to figure out who did it and why. And Charles' father happens to work for the Scotland Yard, so that's very convenient. And then he's trying to figure it out. The ending was amazing. The ending was really, really good. I really liked it. All in all, great book. Okay. The next book I have, number 5, is Speechless by Kate Darbishire. This was a middle grade general fiction. I gave it 4 stars. It was published in 2008, but it was written in 2007. And so the technology in the book is like, yeah, so it was published in 2018, but the technology is a little bit dated. This is middle grade, but I think it would be great for all ages. We follow a 7th grader who has cerebral palsy, and she can't walk. She also is really embarrassed of her speech and her voice, and doesn't like to speak, so that's why I call it Speechless, even though she can. But a lot of times people have difficulty understanding her, and she doesn't like to, because she's embarrassed about it. And it really gets into the, like, yes, she does have difficulties because of her disability, but mainly in the book, most of her difficulties are because of how people treat her and how people view her. And it's not always just people being like, mean, but just people, how they judge her and perceive her. I felt like, as far as some negatives, the ending was like too much. way too much happens at the end. I was ready to give those 5 stars until I got to the end. I was like, whoa. It's like, wait, we don't need all this. And it's just like really boom, and just too much happens at the end. But overall, I do like the story. The woman who wrote it, it seems that her daughter has cerebral palsy, and so she based it on that. There was a couple times that, and I'm not criticizing the author at all, but where the character refers to her body as useless, which I can definitely understand if you have a physical disability, that as a person you might feel that way. But I felt a little bit uncomfortable with the author who does not have a disability putting that, because it's told in first person, because I feel like a lot of times with these books, they're written with the idea that they are for all the children, primarily for like middle grade kids who don't have a disability. But it's important to remember that a lot of kids who do have disabilities are going to be reading these books. And I don't know, like I said, if somebody personally feels that way, that's their right. But to sort of put that on them, or to make them, because it happens several times, it's not just a one-time thing. It's a little bit uncomfortable for me as a teacher and a mom and somebody who does have a disability to feel like, I would never want a child to feel like they should feel that way, that they should focus on the fact that they are, like, to feel that their body is useless, because obviously it's not. But if they feel that way, like, there's nothing wrong with those feelings. So I hope that made sense how I put that. And personally, it brought up like a lot of feelings for me. It made me so angry at the school as a teacher. Like, they make these kids, and it's realistic, like, I know this stuff happens, but they make, a kid sort of like take her around, and she's like this burden for the students and for the teachers, and they act like they're doing this, great thing by allowing her to be in the school. And it's like, well, if she's academically able, why shouldn't she be in the school? What's the problem here? You're doing your job by teaching her. Like, you're not doing anything extra. You don't get any extra brownie points. Sorry. That's what you're supposed to do. And as a teacher, it's like, that shouldn't even be like a problem. Like, I just feel like if you think it's a problem to adapt your lessons for students who need extra help, then, like, that's something you need to deal with. That's not a problem with the student. And there's just so many times in the book that I had to put it down, because it did bring up a lot of like personal memories for me. And just like there's one scene where she can't see the science experiment, and the science teacher's trying to be nice, trying to be polite, I should say, and he says, can you see it? And she can't, and it's like obvious she can't. But if she says no, like, there's nothing he can do about it. The science experiment is over there. She can't see it, or it will be this big thing. And so she just says yes, and she sits there and can't see it. And it's just like that because I have trouble seeing, and that happened to me so many times in school, where that if you say you can't see something, they will just, there's nothing they're going to do about it. Or they'll just tell you, well, look at that person. Or, like, I would have a lot of teachers who would just put me in the front row. And say, well, you can see now. And what do you say when you're 12 years old and you still can't see anything? You just nod and you try to get along. And if you fail a test because you can't see well enough, you would rather fail a test than stand out in front of the kids. So I feel like a lot of those things that she paints are really accurate, because in schools, we've done a lot to focus on the academic and to focus on the physical. But especially this age, we don't do a lot to focus on the social and the emotional, and to realize that, at this age, you don't care if you understand algebra. You just care that the kids are not picking on you. Like, that's the main thing. That you're just trying to get along. You just want to, like, keep your head down, don't look at me. And like how she has to plan everything because she's in a wheelchair, and she's like trying to get into the sea of kids, and she's like trying to plan it so that nobody like really notices her, and she can just slip in, and like I feel like a lot of us can relate to that, especially in middle school. But in this book, I really related to that, and it was really good. The next book I read was The Parable of the Talents, the second in the Earthseed Duology by Octavia Butler. I already did a review of this book, which I will link down below. Yeah, so I'm not going to repeat any of that. And the next one I have, second to last, I have 8 altogether. Number 7 is Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. This was published in 1862. I gave it 4.5 stars. And this is considered a Victorian sensational novel. The Woman in White is also a Victorian sensational novel. In this book, we have Lady Audley. She goes by Lucy Graham. She's a governess before she marries Michael Audley, who's a baronet, and he's much older than her. She's described as being very like childlike. Yeah, just very soft. And then Michael Audley has a daughter. Her name is Alicia. She does not like Lady Audley at all. She's very against her. And then we have Robert, the nephew to Michael Audley, and he's sort of the person that we're following in the story as he's discovering things. And we have George Talboys, who appears, and most of the novel are trying to figure out what happened to him. So that's like most of the novel. Robert is a very interesting character because he's a barrister, like technically, but he doesn't do any work because his family's rich, and he gets an allowance every year. So he's just sort of living on that and not really working, and he's considered kind of lazy, but he's a nice person. He takes in like stray dogs and everything. And it's interesting because he's also lazy because he's never really had a reason to do anything, and now he suddenly does, and you are starting to see his character, which is quite interesting. And we have, so the plot at this time, this book was like super popular, really famous, I can see why. Like the plotting is really good. I kept guessing. You think you know the secret, and things just keep getting unfolded and unfolded. Very, very interesting. I definitely understand why it was so popular in its time. It addresses like a lot of the fears about women and motherhood and marriage and wealth and class, and how do you know if you know somebody is somebody who they appear to be, like all of those things we really get into. It wasn't overly melodramatic. I was kind of afraid it would be, but it really wasn't to me. I mean, it's Victorian. We do have like a lot of like plot, like things that are just very convenient in the plot that do happen, but you know, I was okay with that. I feel like the ending for some people will not work very well. But for me personally, I liked it. I shouldn't say I liked it. Like I appreciate it, and it didn't bother me because I didn't take it just at face value. I like a lot of the things that we're looking at. I took it as an interesting window into looking at Victorian society and how people viewed things. And I would much rather read an interesting, fast-paced book like this to understand Victorian society more than like a boring literary book. So, yeah, I really liked it. And I think it's one of those books that would really benefit from like a discussion or like learning about. And I watched some videos from people who know more about Victorian times than I do, and I got a lot more out of the book watching those videos, and I really appreciated that. So it's definitely and it's also really accessible. So if you're looking for a classic or a Victorian, it's a British Victorian classic. If you're looking for something that maybe you're a little bit intimidated by classics, it's a great one to start with because it's really easy. Like you're not going to be very confused. Like you can really get into it. And the Librivox recording of this, which is free on YouTube because it's out of copyright, I will link down below, is really well done. The reading of it is really, because sometimes those can be hit and miss, but that one was really, really good. And then the last thing I have is a short story called The Best Girls by Min Jin Lee. It's the number 1 in the disorder. This, I gave it 4 stars. It's a short story. There's like a series of short stories, and it's on Kindle Unlimited. It has the audio plus the like reading, although I do think it's only on Amazon. So unfortunately, I know a lot of people don't like Amazon. I don't have a choice. I have to use Amazon. But but if you have Kindle Unlimited, it's a great pick. I'll be reading the other ones in this. It's a short story. It's set in Seoul, South Korea in the late 1980s. And it's a family with 3 girls and a boy. I think they're 3 or 4 girls. I don't remember. And it really goes into, like, they're a very poor family. And how much more the boys are valued in their family and in their society, and how girls are definitely not encouraged in school or to get like to really work on their education. And the ending has is very, yeah. I already got to the end of it. Whoa, I wasn't expecting that. So it's also narrated really well, so I would definitely recommend to check it out. So that is what I have read so far in the month of June, or what I have completed so far in the month of June. So let me know down below, what are you reading this month in June? Give me some recommendations, other things that I should read. And please like and subscribe, because I'm a brand new channel and every new subscriber, it makes a big difference. So thank you for watching. Bye bye.